influence decisions and not the citizen back home. How can you help us to believe tonight that you would not do that? And when in office, how will you accomplish that?
I think that that's one of the great questions of this debate. I think the opportunity for you to distinguish the choices you have amongst you, the candidates, and their backgrounds, and their biographies, and their choices, and their hearts, I think that's the deciding question. We're going to agree on a lot of things. We all want lower taxes to get the economy moving. But where do we come from? Senator, as I understand your biography, your first job was for Senator Helms. And I believe, according to your biography on LinkedIn, that it was as a PAC fundraiser, which meant that your job was to go get money from special interests for the senator's re-election. Then, after your time in Washington of more than a decade, you cashiered all of the relationships that you developed on our taxpayer dollars, working as a staff member, handing out checks for buyouts and things like that. And then, as I understand it, you became a lobbyist. And when you became a lobbyist, you took all of those conservative contacts and you walked back into some of those same offices and you lobbied for something for the other team. You lobbied for amnesty that would give 3.3 million illegals the opportunity to take benefits and to vote. Frankly, some of the benefits they're stealing already, and frankly, some of the votes they're probably stealing already too. But you did that by cashiering the access you were provided to do something that worked against the conservative cause. Even Jesse Helms wrote scathing commentaries about amnesty. So I consider that to be a betrayal. How can you be trusted?
Your time is up.
Thank you.
And Senator Rouser, at your extended closing remarks, she'll be able to rebut that. Mr. Crow, you're a smart man. You don't need to repeat that, do you?
No, I'm scared to. I won't. But anyway, I think we're talking about honesty. And well, first of all, here's this little thing I carry around, and I've got on here my financial statement, which I haven't seen my competitors show their financial statement. I've got this term limit that I signed, and I went and found it. I call it the Strom Thurmond term limit pledge, because if you sign it, you ought to be able to stay in government 48 years. And there's somebody else on here that signed it too. And then I signed a real pledge here, and it says that I'm out of here for 8 years, if I'm there for 8 years. I'm a citizen politician. My competition, I just read in the newspaper, plan to spend $400,000 or $500,000 on this race. Both of them, that's almost $1 million. I'm not going to spend very much at all. Somebody's going to take those chips back. And that's what is called lobbying and owing people stuff and doing stuff with that. For one thing, I'm going to go there and they're going to say, well, Randy, we want you to do this. I'm going to say, look, if it's good for the district and it's constitutional and my district wants it, I'll do it. I mean, forget about this money. I don't want money in it. Just keep that out of it. So I think the fact that, and to call, by the way, I have children. I have 2 sons, and they're still around, and guess what? I love them dearly. They're going to be around a while longer, too. And, a politician, I'm a professional politician. Somehow I missed that one. I don't see how I'm a professional politician. I might be a professional anti-politician or something.
Mr. Crow, thank you. Gentlemen, we often hear candidates when they're running for office talk about they need to make cuts in the government. Mr. Pantano, a question to you first. I'd like you to be specific if you can. If elected, where would you begin to make cuts in the federal government? What's on the table? What's off the table?
I was one of the first candidates in North Carolina to support cut, cap, and balance. I believe very severely that we need to, that's a bad word choice. I believe it brings echoes of a certain GOP contender. I believe with my whole heart that we need to reform our entitlement system so that we can improve our credit rating and have better access to capital. And when I think about what we need to be doing at the federal level, it's not even focusing on debt reduction or cutting for the sake of cutting. It's targeting the areas that are going to grow the economy. We need to grow the economy. So the cuts that I would like to make, certainly we have, every agency is going to take a piece. I believe, for example, that even at the Department of Defense, we could cut $100 billion. But I don't believe that we can cut $500 billion as this president wants, or a full trillion with this debt committee's failure. I believe every other agency, the Department of Energy, certainly, Department of Education, Department of the Interior, we can cut across the board. We have to. In fact, wholesale elimination of agencies. The Paul Ryan budget, again, is a concrete plan, so I want to refer you to that. I want you to do your own homework, not just to decide which candidate you want to support, but then once you internalize which one you choose, you need to then be evangelists out in your community. You need to be talking to people about how it is that President Clinton did, in fact, not run budget surpluses, but in fact was running deficits as well. You need to be well-versed with how the budget process works. You do. All of you do. Why am I so passionate about that? Because as a candidate, there's only so much that I can do. As your representative, there's only so much that I can do. We have to count on all of you to have a unified voice with us. Thank you.
Mr. Crow, candidates have long talked about making cuts in the federal government if elected. Where would you begin if you're elected to cut federal government? What's on the table? What's off the table?
Well, everything would be on the table. Something I've said over and over again, I do not believe this country is ever going to get on the right track. We have got some guys in there, they've got a really cool franchise. They're loaning money to the United States. Most of the national debt of the $15 trillion is owed to the Federal Reserve, and this goes to individuals. I could give you their names, but I'm not going to. They're getting like $400 billion when interest rates are low. You send interest rates up to 20%, and they really get a lot of. You're talking about $400 billion you could cut off right there if you got rid of the Federal Reserve. And that would be, the first thing that I would do, except maybe, try to, go into impeaching Obama if he's still around. But I think, but anything, I mean, I've been a small businessman all my life. I mean, you talk about cutting light bulbs off and this, that, and the other. I've saved money on everything, but I mean, the education department, I think that would be a good one to get rid of. And I mean, I would go through everything. If there was a way to cut expenses, I would just be anti-everything. I mean, and anti-spending money if I could. But I still believe in Social Security contributions. People that don't, I just see that is a big mistake. All right, thank you.
Mr. Crow, thank you. Senator Rouser, candidates often talk about making cuts in federal government if elected. If you're elected, sir, where would you begin to make cuts in the federal government? What's on the table? What's off the table?
Good question, and it's a good question that every candidate should answer. When I served in the executive branch for about a year and a half, I learned how the bureaucrats operate. It gives me a lot of insight into how to defund them and get rid of them. When I went over to the Department of Energy one day, you walk down the hall, and most of them who are drawing six-figure salaries are sitting there reading books and reading magazines. Ladies and gentlemen, we can devolve, get rid of the Department of Energy, and move some of those responsibilities back to the states. The Department of Commerce, same thing. HUD, Housing and Urban Development, known as HUD, same thing. Department of Education. If you look at the decline of education in this country, it started when the federal government got involved with it. That's another agency. And there's been a lot of talk about the Paul Ryan plan, and I applaud Paul Ryan. I think he's a great member of Congress. But there's one issue that I have with the Paul Ryan budget, and that's the fact that it doesn't balance the budget until 2040. 2040. It's almost 30 years from now. We don't have that kind of time. We need to be eliminating wholesale departments of the federal government. We need to be tackling Medicaid. And one of the ways you can handle Medicaid is block grant those monies to the state. As a state legislature, Medicaid is killing us this year. Carolyn Justice and I, when we go back to the legislature, we got almost a $400 million deficit to deal with, all because of Medicaid. We have to make cuts, and we have to make them now, and we got to reform the government.
Thank you, sir.